So that's it then. We've come to the end of the vehicle to grid trial that I've been taking part of, and in this video we're going to summarise what happened, what I've learned from it, and why I think vehicle to grid technology has got an amazing future, just maybe not for me. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been over 2 years now since I signed up for the Octopus Power Loop trial. So as a quick recap, Octopus Electric Vehicles supplied me with a Nissan Leaf on a 2-year lease. As well as that, they then fitted the equipment that you see behind me and a little bit more equipment in my home, which enabled me to use my Nissan Leaf to supply energy back into the grid at times that they chose based on the demand going on the grid. The whole purpose of this trial, of course, is to see if electric vehicles can in the future be used en masse as a way of balancing grid demand. Now, this trial wasn't just a trial of the technology. For the most part, actually, the technology is pretty well understood. But this was a trial about whether all of the sort of mechanics could bring this kind of technology together in the UK with all of the different providers and companies that are involved with supplying energy into the homes and onto the grid to see if all of that could work. And I think that's one of the things that people don't really realise often, is that there are a huge number of providers and companies involved in getting power into your home. Depending on where you live in the UK, you will have a distribution network operator, often called a DNO for short. These are the companies that manage the local power network in your area. So I'm in Suffolk, and so I am served by UK Power Networks. They look after the equipment, the wires in the street, the transformers, all of that kind of transmission equipment that gets energy to your home. Then, of course, there's the energy provider themselves. Now, the energy provider, in my case, of course, is Octopus Energy. And these take responsibility from the DNO at your meter box, basically. And they provide me with the smart meter. And, of course, they've, in this case, provided me with the electric vehicle charger that's capable of doing vehicle to grid, which in this case is the Wallbox Quasar. So you can see already there's a couple of companies in play here already that need to come together in order for vehicle to grid to work. There's others too. So as well as that, there's the company that actually collects the meter readings from your smart meter in your home. And then, of course, when you add in this vehicle to grid technology, there's the actual provider of the hardware that you can see behind me, Wallbox in this case, and they will have APIs and your software that links this device back to the grid so that the grid can actually command the unit here to come on at a particular time of day, which then suits them. With all that said, it's no wonder that you need to do a trial of this stuff, because with all of these various parties in the mix, getting all of this kind of thing to work together is a little bit of a challenge just from an organisational perspective. And that's why the technology on the home, although I had the Leaf for 2 years, I only really ended up using the vehicle to grid technology for about 8 months. The rest of the trial was consumed with actually enabling this trial to take place. So getting all of the other things lined up and all of the kind of bureaucracy that went along with that. So that's where a lot of the time was taken up on this trial, was just trying to get all of the things lined up that meant that I could have this technology fitted to my home. And obviously all of that is absolutely brilliant learning for an actual future rollout of this technology, you know, a commercialization and upscaling of it, you know, something that's going to mean that you can just have this technology as part of your home. It can be installed on new homes, and it's not going to need all of the kind of very bespoke work that's happened here on my house, and some of the bespoke technology that has been installed alongside the charger to make this work. It's also no surprise that this trial didn't go according to plan, because this entire trial has been conducted whilst we have been undergoing a global pandemic, and that's certainly not helped, and I'm sure that's protracted things because inside those organisations I'm sure that people couldn't meet together and discuss some of the aspects of this trial. So COVID has played a part in the reason that I haven't had this equipment on my home for as long as perhaps was first envisaged, but certainly there were other aspects of this too that caused some delay. So what happened then? What was the main sticking point? So the main sticking point for this trial, as far as I'm aware, and of course I'm not aware of all of the goings on behind closed doors, but the things that I was told as a consumer on this trial journey was that the main sticking point was actually my location here. My home here is actually quite closely located to the transformer. It's only about 150 meters away down the road there. That, coupled with the fact that there is a lot of solar generation already going on in other people's homes that feed into that transformer, meant that the DNO UK Power Networks was very concerned that adding another kind of 7 kilowatts of potential export would actually then cause that transformer to have problems. So they needed to limit the amount of export energy to that transformer. Now obviously that's a worst case scenario. I think we can all appreciate that when your solar is exporting energy to the grid and when your vehicle to grid technology is exporting energy to the grid would in most circumstances be at completely different times of the day. Solar is obviously exporting during the day when the sun is shining, and vehicle to grid is really designed for pushing energy onto the grid at peak loads, at peak times, and peak times in the UK here is anywhere from about 5 to 7 o'clock in the evening, long after my solar panels have being able to generate any kind of useful electricity. So of course they can't take that chance. There's always a possibility that the unit could be manually configured to export during a very hot sunny day. There's also the chance of a software error creeping in that would accidentally command my car to export energy to the grid. All of those circumstances would of course cause potential trouble to the transformer. That would basically mean that 11 kilowatts of energy was being pushed onto the grid, and again, combined with all of the other things that are exporting energy onto the grid, that could cause a lot of problems for the transformer and potentially some of the local infrastructure leading up to that transformer. One of the things that I've heard talked about, and I'm no expert on this, is around grid reinforcement. So as this kind of stuff becomes more popular, the local distribution network operators might have to reinforce their grids in order to have all of this energy kind of being pushed back. And if you think about that, that makes total sense. Grids are designed in a kind of root and branch structure, so we're right at the very thin tendrils of the root and branch structure. All the big stuff is back in the grid towards the power stations. But if we're becoming the power stations now, we might need some of that local grid infrastructure reinforced to take it. So what was the solution to this then? So the solution was that we had to have an additional device installed in the home which basically capped our export limit, so that whatever happened, software glitches or just manual interventions, we would never be able to export more than 8 kilowatts at any one time onto the grid. Now that was done by a particular device which was needed to be accredited. It also needed to be designed and manufactured as part of this whole trial. So again, you can understand that going from sort of having a design on paper right through to getting it accredited so that it can be used within my home was a lengthy process, and again that was another delay to this trial kind of getting underway. Eventually, however, we did get there. We installed this in the late summer of last year, and I've got a whole video on that which I'll link to here or here, and you can see exactly what went into installing this technology into the home. It's really a fascinating video, and there's a lot going on now in my home to make this all happen. And clearly one of the things is that because it's a very bespoke unit, it's also very bulky and it's very big. It's very inefficient in terms of its space. It's been designed of kind of off-the-shelf kinds of components, and so this isn't going to be something that would go into everyone's home in the future. So don't worry. It's clearly something that's in that very prototype type stage. So up to this point then I learned that for vehicle to grid to really work, then these chargers, like this one here, are really going to be having to become equipped with some of this technology inbuilt in it of itself, so that homeowners don't have to go through the, normally the expense and the hassle of having to have a huge amount of modification to their home wiring. If this had the technology to limit its own provision out into the grid, instead of having to rely on a separate device, then the entire installation in this home would have been no different to installing a normal EV charger. Whereas, as you'll see, I'll put some pictures up, there's a huge amount of additional work, which ultimately, if you were just doing this as a normal consumer, you would have to pay for, and it would become prohibitively expensive, in my opinion. And a lot of that technology actually is already here. My Zappi unit, which is just over here, has some of those grid limiting features built in. So I think really it's just about these manufacturers coming together and making sure all of the features are actually built into the boxes. Plus, the DNOs actually signing off on the fact that they're willing to support the features. And that could be a bit of an overhead, because clearly if you've got lots of these charge points coming out, then a DNO might have to kind of validate every single one. So there might be a bit of a market, or probably already is a market, for certain components to be produced and then included within these devices which meet a certain specification. So really all of the manufacturer just has to say is that they've got this particular thing within their charge point, and then that qualifies them for a vehicle to grid situation. So let's take a look at this charger then, shall we? So this is a wallbox quasar. It's doing a heck of a lot more work than your average electric vehicle charger. This charger here has to do a lot more because it's bidirectional. So we're going from the grid into the vehicle to charge the vehicle, and then we're also going from the vehicle to the grid to push energy out into the grid at peak time. Now, you'll notice immediately that the size of the cable coming out of this unit is huge in comparison to other units like my Energy Zappi. This is because this is doing the DC to AC conversion, and hence why this massive box has a huge piece of aluminium heatsink behind it. This is a very intensive process. It generates a lot of heat, and therefore that heat needs to be dissipated in the unit here. The cables need to be thick, because we're talking about DC current going through this rather than alternating current, and that requires thicker cables, although even for those standards this cable is really thick. And I've got a few comments about this particular charger. Obviously, I've already talked about how it doesn't have any kind of limiting features within itself, so they've had to be put in externally. But I've got a few problems with this unit. So the first thing is the cable thickness actually does make it quite hard to use on a daily basis. Coiling and uncoiling such a thick cable is quite a job, and you can see actually how much cable we've got here. It's also very heavy, so if you're not into lifting big heavy cables, then this isn't for you. The other thing is it uncoils. It has to have a large radius to uncoil as well, and what that means is that you have a tendency to kind of hit the car with a part of the cable as you're trying to uncoil it and plug it in, which could lead to scuffing of bodywork on the vehicle. My main bugbear with this unit, though, was actually the fact that it has a fan just here, and it's not just any old fan. It's like a kind of server fan out of a data center, and it's quite loud. And that if we had this trial running for the 2 years, going over a summer period when people around me had their windows open, I think they would have been a little bit upset about the level of noise coming from this unit in a hot, sticky summer evening as it tried to cool the unit down. Other things, the unit does have a display, but it's actually very dim. I mean, we're not particularly sunny day here, but you can barely see the display on the screen here, and I really never used it. The main way that we use this is to use it through the app. This device connects via Bluetooth. You then configure it on the app to connect to your Wi-Fi. Once it's connected to the Wi-Fi, that's how then it communicates back and forth to the servers to get the commands to start doing the kind of vehicle to grid work. And after that, it's pretty much fire and forget. I would just come home in the evening, plug this into the Leaf, and I would let it do the rest. And for the most part, it was very successful at doing that, and we didn't have very many problems. Now, there were a few occasions in the evening where I did come home and the charger actually started to charge the car at peak times rather than switch over to a vehicle to grid. Now, I don't know if that was a fault of this unit particularly, or whether it was a fault with the vehicle to grid trial. It was something I reported to them and they were aware of, and they gave me a few instructions, but it was something that I would noticed every now and again creeping into the experience. Not every night when we plugged the car in, but sometimes I come home and it would just start charging rather than discharging. And obviously one of the things you don't want to do really at peak time is start charging your vehicle, because that's really having the opposite effect on the grid. It's really pushing up demand. So that is something they're going to need to solve and make sure it doesn't happen when you plug your car in the evening. And obviously from a cost perspective as a consumer, I don't want that either, because I am charging my cars overnight on a cheap rate, which means anytime this unit was charging the car when I came home in the evening and I didn't know, then that's actually costing me additional money that I don't really want to be incurring, and I want this to be really locked into my current energy tariff. So that was the only part of the vehicle to grid trial that we didn't get joined up. The relationship between the vehicle to grid trial that was going on in my house and the actual energy tariff that I was a part of. So throughout this entire trial, I was on and continue to be on the Octopus Go tariff, which I've been on now ever since I've had an electric vehicle. Now, clearly one of the problems that has is that then it's not reactive to what the vehicle to grid system is doing. And in my stats video I did go into this a little bit by saying that when some of these things were happening, for example when it was charging when I didn't want it to charge because there was a problem, and also overnight when the vehicle to grid system chose to charge the car, sometimes it missed out on the hours of cheap rate electricity as governed by my Octopus Go tariff. So really, for this to be more complete as a product, if you like, vehicle to grid needs to come alongside a more dynamic tariff, perhaps something a bit like Agile, where essentially there's a price out there on the grid, and then the vehicle to grid system itself is almost tuned to an energy price. So once the price goes above a certain amount of money, it actually starts to push energy out into the grid. And actually that might be a way to incentivize people like me to actually take up this kind of technology again. So for example, energy prices are very expensive right now, and if I was able to leverage that by essentially selling energy at an expensive rate and then buying it back at a cheap rate, or at least getting some kind of cut of which the energy provider is profiting, and I'm also profiting a little bit too, or at least just not paying a huge amount for my energy, then perhaps that is another reason that I might consider vehicle to grid over something like vehicle to home. So as part of the trial, we had an Octopus Energy app and the Wallbox app as well. Now with the Octopus app, I didn't use that very much, but when I did use it, it was pretty much just to set the whole thing up at the beginning, and then I kind of forgot about it. What you had in there was the ability to set how much charge you want at the beginning of the day. So if I wanted 80% charge by 6 o'clock in the morning, I could set that, and every time I come out to the car, that's what it should have in it. Now there were a few niggles with that, and they did recognise that that wasn't quite working and they needed to do some adjustments, but again, this was a trial, so they did manage to sort that out as they went through the trial. I didn't really use the app too much. It did have a small gamification element in there, which was designed to encourage you to take part in the trial. So you had to do 13 sessions on Powerloop to qualify for the £30 discount on your electric vehicle lease. So that was worth keeping an eye on, and that's exactly what I did. Every now and again I would just go in and check to see if I'd qualified for that month's £30, and I really didn't use it much more than that. There were features in there to boost charge and to stop charging. I did find that a little bit unreliable, I must say, and so what I ended up doing in the end was actually using the Wallbox app every time I really wanted to interact with the charger, because I knew that I had a direct link into the wall box charger and I could just cancel the charge or change the charge from import to export. So one of the things that I really learned on this trial was I learned the difference between vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. So vehicle to home is where essentially your car becomes like a power wall or a home battery, and it really reacts to the demand in your home. So when you put the oven on, it will start feeding exactly the same amount of energy into your home. I do think there's a lower limit there, but it will, essentially when you start to do some big loads within the home, it will then start to kind of balance and match the amount of energy that you're using. Vehicle to grid is completely different from that. So with vehicle to grid, it's not you that decides when your car is pushing electricity out onto the grid. It's the grid, your energy company, in this case Octopus, of course. Octopus would command my car to start pushing out to the grid. Now, the thing about that is it's completely serendipitous as to whether that actually benefits me. So if I happen to be cooking dinner at 6 o'clock in the evening and my car is pushing energy to the grid, which we did, then we would benefit from that essentially not drawing any energy into the grid. We would just push a little bit of that energy into the usage within the home, rather than we would sort of intercept it, if you like, as the energy was leaving our home. And I've got a vehicle to grid stats video that I'll link here, where I go through all the detail on those sessions. That's the thing that I didn't realise going into this trial, the difference between vehicle to grid and vehicle to home. I kind of thought they were the same, and that was a little bit naive. I think for me, vehicle to home would be a better solution, because it would mean I wouldn't have to invest in a home battery storage system. Essentially, my car would be that battery storage system, and I wouldn't have to worry, therefore, about the battery storage system being old, because I would change my car on a fairly regular basis, and therefore I wouldn't need to worry about batteries after 10 or 15 years becoming less effective and then having to invest again in replacement products. Whereas cars are something that you don't tend to keep for 10 or 15 years, and so you will get a new car with a new set of batteries. I really like that idea, and I think I want to explore that. One of the things I don't know is whether these devices here that I have on the home could be actually adapted to vehicle to home. The big difference between vehicle to home from a technology perspective is that this would need to sense how much energy was actually being used in the home. There's nothing on this device right now that would detect how much energy is being used in the home. So then, with all that said, does vehicle to grid technology have a future? Well, personally, I think it absolutely does. Even though I might not think that it's a technology that I'd have on my home, I'm much more inclined to go for vehicle to home, or perhaps a battery storage solution. The technology itself has got massive potential. I think where it does have that big potential, though, is in those vast companies which have huge fleets of vehicles. Just think about DPD, the Post Office, BT, Openreach, the British Gas, Transco, all of these companies with all of these fleets of vehicles, a lot of them often stored in depots overnight where they're just not doing anything. And in fact, if you think about the kind of working day, they're being returned to the depot at just exactly precisely the right time to then start to contribute into vehicle to grid. So these companies could be making a huge amount of money, potentially, depending on energy costs, in actually plugging all of their vehicles in at their depot and then providing energy out into the grid. The big challenge with that, of course, is what we were talking about earlier in terms of vehicle to grid pushing a lot of power out onto the network. May need a lot of grid reinforcement around those depots where those vehicles are being stored. Yeah, and before anyone says these vehicles are going to be completely flat at the end of their day, then I don't think they will be. A lot of courier vans, post office vans, vehicles like that are just going around the same local area all day, every day, not doing huge amounts of mileage. I think the main thing is the technology arriving too slowly? There's a lot of stuff that, for example, here we're still using a CHAdeMO connector. So vehicle to grid currently is using the Betamax of charging standards. This connector is now kind of old hat. CCS has won the format war for fast charging, for direct DC rapid charging and things like that. And that's the way that vehicle-to-grid technology is currently being used. However, I have seen fully charged videos where they're using vehicle-to-grid technology on AC charging. Now that could be really compelling because the infrastructure actually within the charger is vastly simplified. You don't need to do the AC to DC conversion, so that could be a real benefit for an AC version. And essentially the vehicle to grid technology is built into the vehicle itself. Now of course the big problem with that is that that might add a few pounds or a few £100s onto the price of the vehicle, and of course is anyone going to buy into that as a vehicle manufacturer? Because putting a few £100s on the price of every vehicle they sell is something they're going to have to pass on to the consumer, and they're going to want to have to pay for that. So I sort of struggle with that a little bit, unless it can just be absorbed within the technology itself, and not too much additional costs would be incurred on there. I don't know, but I'm just supposing that for that technology to really be available on an AC device, the onboard charger in the vehicle may have to be uplifted. But I have seen a fully charged video. I'll try and link it if I can find it. I think it was somewhere in the Netherlands, where they were using some just regular electric cars to use their own onboard chargers to push out to the grid, vastly simplifying and reducing the cost here, which could be a really good thing for the future of this technology. Another place, of course, that this vehicle-to-grid technology could be really beneficial is at the workplace. So if you do drive into a workplace and park in a car park, then actually whilst you're doing that, your vehicle could be contributing to a vehicle-to-grid setup. Equally, going to a shopping centre, all of those kinds of things could lend themselves to this kind of technology. So that's it. That's my thoughts on this vehicle-to-grid technology. The only final thing to mention is that as the trial is over, I find out that this charger is now mine, which is incredible. It is a very expensive charger, and I really don't know what I'm going to do with it. So the Leaf has already gone back. I don't have a Nissan anymore, and I don't have another electric vehicle with CHAdeMO fitted to it. So I don't know what the future of this charger is going to be. I might sell it. I'm not sure who would want to buy it. I might get another Nissan Leaf so that I can use it. And if I do get another Nissan Leaf, will I be able to use this charger with vehicle to home? So is there things that I can do to add inductive couplinks to sense generation out from my house or consumption, to turn this thing into a vehicle to home device? I don't know. These are all questions that hopefully we'll answer in future videos. We've got Fully Charged Live coming up. I might go and see if I can have a chat to the folks at Wallbox, who I'm sure will be there. So that's really just it for this video. It's a bit of a summary, a bit of a download of everything that I've learned along the journey here. Please check out my other videos on vehicle to grid technology that I have done. I think it's really exciting. It's probably not for me, but I think it could be massive for a whole load of industry organisations, and if they can make it work on AC charging, then it could really come back into the consumer world as well. But as ever, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.